Part 1. Doctor had worked at the Galactic Research Consortium for 7 years. In all that time, she had never questioned the numbers. Numbers were supposed to be simple. They told you what was true without any lies or confusion. But today, the numbers made no sense at all. She sat alone in her small office on Station Meridian, surrounded by floating screens filled with data. Her job was boring but important. She reviewed grant applications. She tracked funding. She made sure the reports were correct before sending them to her superiors. It was the kind of work that most people ignored, which was exactly why I liked it. She could see things that others missed. The problem had started 3 days ago. She was preparing the annual funding report when she noticed something strange. Human researchers received grants at nearly 3 times the rate of any other species in the consortium. At first, she thought she had made a mistake. Humans had only joined the consortium 40 years ago. There were 12 founding species, some of them millions of years old. How could humans be getting so much funding? She checked her calculations again, then again. The numbers stayed the same. Leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. The station hummed around her, a low vibration that never stopped. Outside her window, she could see the curve of a gas giant, its storms swirling in bands of orange and white. Somewhere down there, a research team was studying the planet's atmosphere. She wondered if they were human. She decided to bring her findings to Coordinator. Was her supervisor a member of the species? They were tall and thin, with skin that shifted colors based on their emotions. They had been part of the consortium for almost 2 million years. If anyone could explain the strange numbers, it would be. She found the coordinator in the central administration hub, reviewing reports on a large curved screen. Skin was a calm blue, which meant they were focused and at peace. When approached, the coordinator turned with the slow grace that all possessed. Doctor said, "You look troubled." "I found something in the funding data," said. She pulled up her findings on a portable display. Human researchers are receiving grants at almost 3 times the average rate. I thought it might be an error, but I've checked everything. The pattern goes back decades. Looked at the data. Their skin flickered, shifting from blue to a pale gray. Knew enough about biology to recognize the sign. Gray meant discomfort. Gray meant the coordinator wished they were somewhere else. "This matter is above your clearance level," said quietly. Blinked, "Excuse me. I cannot discuss this with you. Please return to your regular duties." Turned away, their skin still that troubled gray. The conversation was over. Walked back to her office in a daze. In 7 years, she had never been told that something was above her clearance. She was an administrator. She saw everything. That was her job. What could possibly be hidden from someone whose entire purpose was to track the flow of money and resources? The question burned in her mind for the rest of the day. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in her small quarters and stared at the darkness, thinking about gray skin and the words they had used. Above your clearance level. That meant there was something to find, something real. The next morning began to dig. She started with the public records. Every grant the consortium awarded was documented, along with the name of the researcher and a summary of their project. She spent hours reading through thousands of entries, looking for anything unusual. The human advantage was real. It wasn't hidden. Human scientists won grants for everything from theoretical physics to xenobiology to cultural studies. They won at rates that should have been impossible for such a young species. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that no one seemed to question it. There were no complaints from other species, no accusations of favoritism, no protests or demands for investigation. It was as if everyone had simply accepted that humans deserved more funding than anyone else. That couldn't be natural. Someone had made a decision. Someone had created a policy. Dug deeper. She accessed archived administrative files, some of them decades old. Most were routine reports and meeting notes, boring documents that no one had looked at in years. But buried in the archives, she found something that made her heart stop. It was called Directive 7 Gamma. The document was classified at the highest level, but had been working for the consortium long enough to know a few tricks. She couldn't read the full directive, but she could see its summary in the index system. The words were simple and clear: priority funding allocation for human-led research initiatives across all scientific disciplines. It wasn't a secret advantage. It wasn't corruption or favoritism. It was official policy. The consortium had decided on purpose to give humans more money than anyone else. But why? Kept searching. She found references to a council session from 32 years ago, just 8 years after humanity's first contact with the consortium. The session had been closed to the public, but like all official proceedings, it had been recorded for historical purposes. It took her 2 days to find a way to access the recording. She had to call in favors from colleagues in the archives division, people who owed her for small kindnesses over the years. Finally, late one night, she sat alone in her office and opened the file. The image flickered to life on her screen. She saw the great council chamber, a vast circular room with seats arranged in rings around a central platform. Representatives from all 12 founding species were present. Some she recognized from history files. Others were strange to her, members of species she had only read about. At the center of the chamber stood the Archspeaker, a being from a species called the were ancient beyond imagination. They had achieved when Earth was still covered in ice. The Archspeaker was old even by their standards, their body wrapped in ceremonial robes that glittered with embedded lights. The recording had no sound at first. Then the audio kicked in and heard the Archspeaker's voice. It was deep and slow, like stones grinding together. "We have completed our analysis of humanity," the Archspeaker said. "We have studied their history. We have examined their scientific achievements. We have observed their patterns of thought." The chamber was silent. Every representative watched without moving. "Our conclusion is unanimous," the Archspeaker continued. "Human cognition is unprecedented. Their approach to discovery follows no pattern we can predict. They make connections that our greatest minds cannot see. They ask questions we would never think to ask." One of the other representatives spoke up, recognized them as a species that lived in ammonia oceans. "Are you suggesting they are superior to us?" "No," the Archspeaker said firmly. "They are not superior, they are different, and that difference is exactly what we need." The Archspeaker moved to the center of the platform. Even through the old recording, could feel the weight of the moment. "For the past 300,000 years, our combined scientific progress has been slowing. We have reached the limits of our intuition. We have explored every path that our minds can naturally conceive. The great mysteries remain unsolved. We are stuck." The representatives shifted uncomfortably. Some made sounds of protest, but no one interrupted. "Humanity offers us a way forward," the Archspeaker said. "Their minds work differently from ours. They see what we cannot see. They imagine what we cannot imagine. If we give them resources, if we support their research, they will take us places we could never reach alone." The Archspeaker paused. When they spoke again, their voice was heavy with something that might have been hope or might have been fear. "We must give them resources. The alternative is stagnation for all of us." The recording ended. Sat in the darkness of her office, her mind racing. She had spent 7 years thinking she understood how the consortium worked. Now she realized she had understood nothing at all. Humans were not just members of the consortium. They were the consortium's last hope. And no one had ever told them. Part 2. Doctor had spent his entire career being told that his ideas were impossible. He had learned to take it as a compliment. Today, standing in his cluttered laboratory on Station Meridian, he held a document that proved someone finally believed him. His grant proposal had been approved. Full funding for 3 years. Resources to build any equipment he needed. permission to recruit researchers from any species in the consortium. The project was called the Cognitive Diversity Initiative, wanted to study why different species thought in different ways, and more importantly, why those differences mattered for scientific discovery. It was the kind of research that most scientists considered too philosophical to be useful. The grant committee had disagreed. Read the approval letter 3 more times, just to make sure it was real. Then he sat down heavily in his chair and laughed. He was 43 years old, born on Earth in a small city called Nairobi. He had left Earth at 22 to study at the Consortium's Central University, one of only a handful of humans accepted each year. His professors had praised his intelligence but worried about his methods. He asked strange questions. He made connections that seemed random. He had once written a paper comparing the mathematics of black holes to the structure of ancient human music, and his advisor had nearly thrown him out of the program. Now he had funding to study exactly that kind of thinking. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. His first task was to build a team. He needed humans who shared his interest in cognitive science, but he also needed members of other species to provide outside perspectives. After weeks of interviews, he assembled a group that made him proud. There were 3 humans: Dr. Sarah, a neuroscientist who had mapped the brains of 6 different species; Dr. a historian who specialized in the development of scientific thought; and Dr. Wei, a young physicist who had already published papers challenging established theories about gravity. There were also 2 observers, sent by coordinator to monitor the project. Suspected they were also there to make sure the humans didn't cause too much trouble. And finally, there was Vessel of Currents, a philosopher who had agreed to join despite deep reservations about the entire premise. Met with Vessel of Currents privately on the first day of the project. There was a massive creature, her body adapted for life in ammonia oceans. On the station, she moved in a special tank filled with her native atmosphere, her many limbs flowing gracefully through the liquid. "I must be honest with you," Vessel of Currents said. Her voice came through a translator but could hear the uncertainty beneath the words. "Studying human cognition makes me uncomfortable." Why asked. "Because your thoughts feel dangerous to me." The limbs curled inward, a sign of distress in her species. "When I read human scientific papers, I experience what my people call the vertigo of depths. It is the feeling of standing at the edge of an abyss, looking down into darkness that has no bottom." Considered this carefully. "Is that why you agreed to join, because it scares you?" "Yes," Vessel of Currents admitted. "My teachers always said that the things we fear most are the things we most need to understand. Human thinking frightens me, therefore I must study it." The project began in earnest, and his team gathered data from across the consortium, examining how different species approached scientific problems. The patterns they found confirmed what had suspected for years. Every species had what he called a cognitive signature, a natural way of understanding the universe shaped by their biology and environment. The who could sense electromagnetic fields directly had developed the most advanced theories of energy and radiation in the consortium. The living in dense liquid environments had mastered fluid dynamics and pressure physics. Each species excelled in the areas that felt intuitive to them. But they also had blind spots. They struggled with concepts that couldn't be expressed in terms of fields and waves. They found it almost impossible to understand phenomena that occurred in vacuum or gas. Every species had pushed their natural understanding to its limits, and then stopped. Humans were different. Spent weeks analyzing human scientific history. What he found was chaos. Human science didn't follow any logical progression. It lurched sideways, doubled back, and made leaps that seemed completely random. A human named Alexander Fleming had been studying bacteria when some mold contaminated his samples. Instead of throwing out the ruined experiment, he noticed that the mold was killing the bacteria. From that accident came antibiotics, one of the most important medical discoveries in human history. A human named Isaac Newton had watched an apple fall from a tree. From that simple observation, he had developed a theory that explained the motion of planets millions of kilometers away. The connection between falling fruit and orbiting worlds made no logical sense, yet it was true. A human named Albert had imagined what it would be like to ride on a beam of light. From that thought experiment, he had revolutionized the understanding of space and time itself. The pattern is clear, told his team during a research meeting. Humans don't think in straight lines. We think in networks. We connect ideas that have no obvious relationship. Sometimes those connections are wrong, but sometimes they lead to discoveries that other species could never make. Dr. Wei nodded eagerly. I've seen this in my own work. When I first proposed my gravity theory, my colleagues said it made no sense. They couldn't understand how I had reached my conclusions. I couldn't really explain it either. The idea just appeared in my mind. That is precisely what frightens us, said one of the observers, her skin shifting to an uncomfortable purple. Your thoughts do not follow rules we can understand. How can we trust conclusions that come from chaos? You trust them because they work, said simply. Human intuition leads to wrong answers most of the time, but when it's right in ways that change everything. The months passed. The team's findings grew more detailed and more troubling. Began to realize that the consortium's interest in human cognition was not just scientific curiosity, it was necessity. He accessed historical records going back hundreds of thousands of years. What he found shocked him. The great scientific achievements of the ancient species, the discoveries that had built the consortium and enabled interstellar civilization, had all occurred long ago. In recent, progress had slowed dramatically. The oldest species were still brilliant, still capable, but they were no longer making breakthroughs. They were refining old ideas, not creating new ones. Then humanity had arrived. In just 40 years, human researchers had contributed to more major discoveries than any other species in the consortium. They had found new approaches to problems that had been unsolved for millions of years. They had asked questions that no one else had thought to ask. Compiled the statistics carefully. Over 73% of major paradigm shifts in consortium science since first contact had originated from human researchers or from teams led by humans. The number was staggering. He decided to present his findings publicly. He booked the largest auditorium on Station Meridian and sent invitations to researchers from every species on the station. On the day of the presentation, the room was packed. Thousands of beings filled the seats, their bodies ranging from humanoid to completely alien. Stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd. He felt small and fragile, a young species speaking to civilizations that had existed for millions of years. But he also felt something else. He felt like he was telling them a truth they needed to hear. He presented his data methodically. He showed the cognitive signatures of each species. He demonstrated the pattern of human discovery. He revealed the 73% statistic. The audience murmured. Some made sounds of surprise. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I want to be clear about something, said. I am not claiming that humans are superior to any other species. We are not smarter. We are not better. In many ways, we are worse. Our thinking is undisciplined. Our intuitions are often wrong. We make mistakes constantly. He paused, letting the words sink in. But our mistakes are different from your mistakes. Our wrong answers lead us to different places than your wrong answers lead you. And sometimes, very rarely, our chaos produces something that your order never could. He took a deep breath before delivering his final point. The consortium is not just benefiting from human creativity. It has become dependent on it. Without human researchers, the progress of the past 40 years would never have happened. The great mysteries that were unsolved for millions of years would still be unsolved. The auditorium fell silent. looked out at the crowd, at the ancient beings who had built civilizations when humanity was still learning to use fire. He saw fear in some faces, wonder in others, and in a few, something that looked almost like relief. The truth was finally out. Now they would have to decide what to do with it. Part 3. The crisis began 3 weeks after his presentation. It started with whispers. Small groups of researchers from the older species began meeting in private, discussing what they had heard. The conversations were quiet at first, but they grew louder and angrier with each passing day. By the end of the month, the movement had a name: the Purists. The Purists believed that humanity's influence on consortium science was a form of colonialism. They argued that the ancient species were losing their identities, abandoning their own ways of thinking to chase human ideas. They demanded that Directive 7 Gamma be repealed and that funding be distributed equally among all species. Their leader was a young named, unlike coordinator, was bold and passionate, their skin constantly shifting through bright colors as they spoke. They had been born long after first contact with humanity, and they had grown up watching human researchers win grant after grant while scientists struggled for recognition. "We are becoming shadows," declared at a public rally. "We chase human thoughts instead of thinking our own. We copy human methods instead of trusting our instincts. If this continues, we will forget who we are." The message resonated with many young members of the ancient species. They had spent their lives being told that humans were special, that human ideas were the key to progress. Now they were tired of being second place. They wanted to reclaim their heritage. Watched the movement grow with a mixture of understanding and worry. She had started this, in a way. Her discovery of Directive 7 Gamma had spread through the station like a virus. Everyone knew about the policy now. Everyone had an opinion. She reached out to, and they met in a quiet corner of the station's observation deck. Through the transparent walls, they could see the gas giant below, its storms eternal and indifferent. "The Purists are gaining support," said. "They've filed a formal petition for an emergency council session. They want to end the directive." Nodded slowly. He looked tired, his eyes carrying the weight of too many sleepless nights. "I've been thinking about this constantly. Part of me understands their anger. If I were, I would probably feel the same way." But prompted. "But they don't understand what's at stake," turned to face her. "I've been digging into the archives just like you did. I found records going back 300,000 years. The consortium's scientific progress has been declining for most of that time. The ancient species aren't just slowing down. They're stopping." Felt a chill run through her, stopping completely. Almost. Before humanity arrived, the rate of major discoveries had fallen to nearly zero. The greatest minds in the galaxy were producing nothing but refinements of old ideas. They had explored everything their cognitive signatures allowed them to explore. There was nowhere left to go. "And then we showed up," said quietly. "And then we showed up," smiled, but there was no joy in it. Chaos walking into a perfectly ordered room, breaking things, asking stupid questions, making connections that made no sense, and solving problems they couldn't solve for millions of years. "Exactly," looked back at the gas giant. "The Purists think they're fighting for independence. They think they're reclaiming their identity. But what they're really doing is choosing stagnation. They're choosing to stop." Thought about this for a long moment. She thought about the council recording she had watched, about the Archspeaker's words. "The alternative is stagnation for all of us." "We need to tell them," she said. "We need to show them what you found." "We need more than that," replied. "We need to help them understand that this isn't about human superiority. It's about diversity. It's about different kinds of minds working together." They began preparing their case. Gathered the historical data, tracing the decline of scientific progress over hundreds of thousands of years. Worked with his team to develop a new way of explaining human cognition, one that emphasized complementarity rather than competition. Vessel of Currents proved to be their most valuable ally. The philosopher had spent months studying human thinking, and she had come to a new understanding. She agreed to speak at the council session, to offer the perspective of someone who had once feared humanity but had learned to see their value. The emergency council session took place on a day that would never forget. The great chamber was filled to capacity, with representatives from all 12 founding species and observers from dozens of younger civilizations. The purists occupied one section of the room, their supporters wearing symbols of their movement. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. Spoke first. Their skin blazed with passionate colors as they described the indignity of living under Directive 7 Gamma. They talked about talented researchers who had been funding, while human projects received millions of credits. They spoke of cultural erosion, of ancient traditions being abandoned in favor of human methods. We do not deny that humans have contributed to the consortium, concluded, but we reject the idea that any species should receive preferential treatment. We reject the idea that our own ways of thinking are inferior. We demand equality. The chamber erupted in sounds of agreement and disagreement. The council speaker called for order, and gradually the noise subsided, and were called to present their response. They walked to the central platform together, two humans standing before the judgment of civilizations that had existed for millions of years. Spoke first. She presented the data she had found, the long decline of scientific progress that had begun long before humanity existed. She showed how the greatest discoveries of the ancient species had all occurred in their early history, when everything was new and unexplored. She demonstrated how the rate of breakthroughs had fallen steadily over time, until it had nearly reached zero. The consortium was dying before humanity arrived, she said, not in body, but in mind. The great civilizations had reached the limits of their cognitive potential. They had thought every thought their minds could naturally think. Took over, explaining his theory of cognitive signatures. He showed how each species excelled in certain domains but struggled in others. He described the blind spots that every civilization developed, the questions they could never think to ask because their minds simply weren't built that way. Humans are not smarter than any species in this room, said. In many ways, we are less intelligent. Our memories are shorter. Our calculations are slower. Our knowledge is shallow compared to civilizations that have existed for millions of years. He paused, looking around the chamber. But we think differently. Our minds make connections that other minds cannot see. We ask questions that other minds cannot imagine. We are chaos in a universe of order. And why should we value chaos? Interrupted. Why should we celebrate minds that cannot think in straight lines? It was Vessel of Currents who answered. The moved forward in her tank, her many limbs flowing gracefully. The chamber fell silent. Everyone wanted to hear what the ancient philosopher would say. My people have a saying, Vessel of Currents began. The safest waters are the deadest. We evolved in ammonia oceans, where survival depended on finding the most stable currents. We learned to fear turbulence. We learned to seek stillness. She paused, her body shifting in the liquid around her. For most of my life, I believed this wisdom. I sought stability in my thoughts, in my research, in my understanding of the universe. When I first encountered human thinking, I felt terror. Human minds are turbulent. They are unpredictable. They create waves where there should be stillness. But over the past months, I have learned something new. Stillness is safe, yes, but stillness is also death. Living waters must flow. Living minds must change. She turned to face directly. I understand your anger. I share your fear. But if we silence human voices, if we force them to think like us, we will lose something precious. We will lose the chaos that keeps us alive. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the council speaker rose to call for a vote. The result was not close, By a margin of 9-3, the council voted to maintain Directive 7 Gamma. The purists had lost. But as watched the representatives file out of the chamber, she knew that the real work was just beginning. The vote had settled the policy, but it hadn't changed any minds. The anger and resentment would continue. The only solution was time. Time for the different species to learn to work together. Time for the chaos and the order to find balance. After the session, she found standing alone on the observation deck. He was staring out at the stars, his expression unreadable. "We won," said. "Did we?" Turned to face her. "I keep thinking about what's said, about humans receiving preferential treatment, about inequality. The directive exists because we offer something unique. That's not inequality. That's recognition of value." "Is it?" Shook his head. "I don't know anymore. Sometimes I wonder if we're just lucky, if our chaos happens to be useful right now in this moment for these problems. But chaos isn't always good. Sometimes it just destroys things." Vessel of Currents joined them, her tank humming softly as it moved across the deck. "You are troubled, Doctor." "I'm wondering what happens next," admitted. "We've been useful so far. We've helped solve problems that were unsolved for millions of years. But what happens when our chaos stops being useful? What happens when we break something that can't be fixed?" There was silence for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice gentle through the translator. "My teachers taught me that the universe is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a story to be told. The story has no ending and it has no single narrator. Each species adds their voice to the tale. Some voices are steady and reliable. Others are wild and unpredictable, but all of them are needed." She turned to face the stars, her limbs spreading wide in what recognized as a gesture of acceptance. "Humanity's chapter is just beginning. You do not know what it will contain. Neither do we. That uncertainty is not a weakness. It is the most human thing about you." Smiled, the first real smile had seen from him in weeks. "So we just keep going. Keep asking stupid questions and making random connections." "Yes," Vessel of Currents said simply. "You keep being what you are, and we will keep being what we are. Together, we will write a story that neither of us could write alone." Looked out at the stars, at the infinite darkness dotted with points of light. Somewhere out there, ancient mysteries waited to be solved. New questions waited to be asked. The universe was still mostly unknown, still full of secrets that no species had yet discovered. Humanity had a role to play in uncovering those secrets, not because humans were better or smarter, but because human minds were different, strange, chaotic, unpredictable. And in a universe that had grown too orderly, too stable, too still, that chaos was exactly what was needed. Turned away from the window. "I should get back to work. There's a new theory I've been playing with. It probably won't amount to anything." "What's it about?" asked. He grinned. "I noticed a similarity between the structure of dark matter distribution and the pattern of human dreams. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense." "It sounds perfect," Vessel of Currents said. "Please continue." Laughed and walked away, his mind already churning with impossible connections. Watched him go, feeling something warm spreading through her chest. It took her a moment to recognize the feeling. It was hope.